Hello everybody, it's Timothy here. Welcome to my channel. Today we will walk Chulia Street, or Lebo Chulia as it's known today. This is a street that is steep in history. It is a street that is common to many budget travelers, for this is where you find a lot of budget accommodation. Many YouTubers have walked this street and covered the sights along the way, but I'm going to take on a different approach. Through this walk, I want to give you a better appreciation of the sights on Chulia Street. We are looking at the Central Fire Station, which was built in 1908. That is a very long time ago, but I need to remind you here that Georgetown was established even earlier in 1786, which is a good 122 years before. Take a look at Beach Street and see if you can answer this question. Why was the Central Fire Station built in 1908 and not any earlier? The answer to that is, for much of the 19th century, Beach Street was indeed along the beach. Reclamation works to extend the shoreline only began towards the end of the 19th century. It took time to clear the mangrove and stabilize the soil before they could build anything here. For that reason, the Central Fire Station was only completed in 1908. Walking Chulia Street today, you will see this mural depicting Thaipusam, possibly the largest Hindu festival in Penang. Though this festival is celebrated statewide, the significance of its location right here on Chulia Street is barely understood or appreciated. Most people are unaware that Chulia Street was once the backbone of the Indian settlement of Georgetown, a settlement that has shrunk to a mere shadow of itself to a small enclave we call Little India today. That's what I want to help you rediscover as we go on this walking tour. Looking to our right, we see Penang Street, which leads into Georgetown's Little India. But the Indian settlement of Georgetown was not as little as it is today. It stretched as far as present-day Transfer Road and Pranging Road. By the fourth quarter of the 19th century, the expanding Chinese community engulfed the area, uprooting the original Indian settlers, and by the early 20th century, the village has given way to the present brick buildings. This is one of the oldest streets in Georgetown, and even before it was called Chulia Street, it was already the settlement of the Indian community. In the very beginning, this street was known as Malabar Street, after the Malabari Indians, but by 1798, the name Chulia Street has already appeared in early maps. Right here is one of the remnants I spoke about. This is the Nagor Dargah Sharif. It is a dargah or shrine or possibly tomb of an Indian Muslim saint. This is a tradition from Nagor, a city in present-day Tamil Nadu, and is a reminder to us that the southern Indian were composed of both the Hindus as well as the Muslims. The architecture of the dargah, which is similar to another in Singapore, reflects the southern Indian architecture style of Tamil Nadu. And this is just one of many examples, with more to come on this walk, of the incredibly cosmopolitan mix of communities that once called Georgetown home. And even the Indians are not a singular homogeneous community, but one that is richly diverse and disparate. This is a barely scratching the surface glimpse of the wealth of history and heritage that we have right here in Georgetown, and I'm so eager to have the chance to share with you. Nowadays, lots of tourists come to Georgetown to seek its World Heritage Site, and they end up photographing the street art. But that's not the World Heritage. The World Heritage is what I am showing to you, and as we continue our walk, what I will be explaining to you. Georgetown is worthy to be called a World Heritage Site because it is so rich in heritage. But the heritage of Georgetown is not one that is immediately visible. It's not like the pyramids or the Great Wall or Angkor Wat. Georgetown's heritage does not reveal itself so readily. Every street in Georgetown's World Heritage Site has its story, and on this YouTube channel, I will walk the streets with you and draw back the curtain to unveil its heritage. So here we are walking Chulia Street. As I've mentioned earlier, it is one of the oldest streets of Georgetown. It was laid out by Captain Francis Light himself as one of the 4 boundary streets of the original settlement of Georgetown, the other 3 being Light Street, Beach Street and Pitt Street. Across the street is the Teochew Association with the Hanjiang Teochew Ancestral Temple next to it. In a way, it reminds us that, similar to the Indian community, the Chinese of Georgetown is also composed of various sub-ethnic groups, the Teochew being one of them. And it's also an example of how the expanding Chinese community of Georgetown take over areas that were once part of the Indian community. The Teochews originally had their temple on Beach Street but moved over to Chulia Street in 1867. Even today, the Teochew property is like a Chinese island surrounded by properties belonging to the Indian and Indian Muslim communities. We have reached the intersection of Chulia Street with Pitt Street. The junction where I am now marks the end of Francis Light's original settlement. From here, Chulia Street continued like a crooked finger pointing into the hinterland. That hinterland was like a piece of rural India transplanted onto Francis Light's Prince of Wales Island. If you had walked Chulia Street in the early part of the 19th century, and it was not even a street back then, it was more a dirt track, you would come across Malays and Indians and hardly a Chinese in this part of town. The Chinese face of Georgetown, that's so visible anywhere nowadays, would not reach this part of town until much later, arriving like a slow rising tide. The brick buildings you are seeing right here would not be around yet, not till the late part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th. That's when the village gave way to the town. This handsome building, presently occupied by Yu Yang Sang, dates to the turn of the 20th century. At 4 stories, it towered over the surroundings at the time of its completion and is still one of the tallest buildings in this part of town. It was around that time when the Indian character of Chulia Street was gradually being replaced by the influx of Chinese migrants. And as with other cities with long histories, so too in Georgetown, where the private houses of the villagers have long gone, built of thatch and other perishable material, yet their places of worship and mausoleums stay where they were. Right across the street from us is the Noordin Family mausoleum, built in the 19th century by prominent Indian Muslim merchant Muhammad Noordin Marican, who migrated from Tamil Nadu to settle in Penang, but is technically not a Chulia but a Tulican, tracing his ancestry to Turkey. The building was originally a school but was converted to a mausoleum to house the tomb of Marican's mother. Its architecture is similar to that of the Nagore Dargah Sharif, both reflecting the southern Indian presence in this area and monuments to Sufi Muslim presence on Georgetown's Islamic history. Indeed, some of the oldest Muslim sites in Penang, not only on Chulia Street but elsewhere, such as in Datuk Kramat, are shrines to Tamil Sufi saints. The Americans who built the Noordin Family mausoleum were pillars of 19th century Muslim society in Penang, and thus they are closely associated with the biggest mosque in Georgetown, the Kapitan Keling Mosque. This mosque dates back to 1800 and has undergone many makeovers since then. If you had a chance to look at old postcards of the mosque, you would be surprised at how different it used to look. Nevertheless, if you enter the compound and look around, you will be able to find traces of how the mosque used to look like, particularly if you view the mosque from Buckingham Street. That's the road on the opposite side, but we are over here on this side, which is Chulia Street. As we walk Chulia Street in present time, we can see that it is hemmed in on both sides by 2 to 3 story shop houses. These houses come right to the street itself. There is no pavement on the road shoulder. since pedestrianised walkways have already been built into the shophouses themselves in what is known as the 5-footways. It's a form of architecture introduced by the British that is unique to this region, which many do not fully appreciate, including locals who often block the passageway with their motorcycles and potted plants. Passage along the 5-footway should always be kept clear of obstructions, for they are the sidewalk in this tropical city. And yet nowadays, pedestrians are often forced to walk on the streets themselves because they could not enjoy an unobstructed passage on the 5-footways. From the late 1960s to the 80s, Chulia Street transformed into a backpacker's haven, and many inexpensive hotels sprung up to cater to these budget travelers. Nowadays, with the internet, we can have all the travel information we need at our fingertips, so it is difficult for us to wrap our minds around a time when these travelers arrived in Penang with hardly any travel information. Among those who passed through Penang was a young British couple, Tony and Maureen Wheeler, backpacking their way across Southeast Asia towards Australia. Back then, without the luxury of the internet, they were often bombarded by questions from fellow travelers. Can you really hitch through Thailand? What's Bali like? Etc. etc. Eventually, they decided that instead of just giving away the information for free, they should compile it into a guidebook. The first of those guidebooks had the title Across Asia on the Cheap. To give the business a name, Tony Wheeler referenced the lyrics from a Joe Cocker song, Space Captain, which went like this: "Once I was traveling across the sky, this lovely planet caught my eye." But without the printed lyrics, he misheard Lovely Planet as Lonely Planet, and that's how his travel guidebooks got their name. We are now at Cheapside, which also got its name from a street in the city of London, but over here, it is the center for the hardware business. This is where people come to buy things like faucets, chisels and screws long before we have Mr. DIY or Ace Hardware. You will notice that almost all the businesses on Chulia Street are owned or operated by the Chinese who arrived to this part of Georgetown in the late 19th and early 20th century and totally transformed its character to what we see today. It's part of the continuous neighborhood morphology, and if we are observant, we will realize that the past has not been entirely erased. We can still see bits of it here and there, and I will try to point them out. This area has been inhabited for over 100 years, and each community that live here applied their influence to it like layers to a layer cake. If you just come here and walk the street, you are getting the top level, which is just the surface level. But we are going to scratch that surface and see what lies underneath. It will be a lot of fun, and I hope that in future, if you have the chance to walk and explore Chulia Street on your own, you will stop by the sites and remember what we discovered today. But on the surface, Chulia Street today is a street with businesses dominated by the Chinese community, and for travelers, it is where they could get budget accommodation, although having said that, some of the budget places have gentrified and with that have raised their rates. We are walking the street in the early part of the day, so traffic is quite low. By noon and afternoon, this street gets quite congested. As I've mentioned earlier, before all these shophouses were built, this area was already inhabited, with the people being Indians and Indian Muslims who had their settlement here. At that time, it was sparsely populated and the village houses were built away from the road itself. When those village houses make way for the present shophouses, the shophouses were built right to the side of the road so that people can walk on the 5-footway on either side. This has optimized land use, enabling more people to move here, but of course the effect is that the Chinese community moved in to replace the Indians. Over here, we see a straight eclectic style semi-detached townhouse built at the turn of the 20th century. A townhouse is different from a shophouse in that it was intended to be fully residential, even though right now it has been converted to commercial use. Nevertheless, as its purpose was to be a residence, it was set back from the street. The house has a gate which could be locked to prevent access by the general public. It still has a 5-foot way. Many of the original pre-war houses have been demolished, and in their place we find newer buildings. But if you peek behind those Indian almond trees, you could see properties lurking in the background. Many businesses along Chulia Street sprout out to cater to budget travelers who want to be far away from their homeland and still feel at home. These are mostly patronized by foreigners, as locals prefer to get their meals from the local coffee shops. One such local eatery is Pak Hok, which serves quite good chicken rice. Across the road is another coffee shop that is popular for its chicken rice. And in that blue building is another local eatery, popular among the locals for its barbecued and roasted pork, or char siu and silbak. It is at the junction of a minor road called Masjid Road or Jalan Masjid, named after a Masjid Ali Al-Shahan, which was founded in 1840 but is no longer in use. But the Muslim burial ground, now almost hemmed in by the adjoining building, is still there, and if you go and have a look, you will see what remains of the South Indian architecture. Small-scale shophouse development took place at different spots along Chulia Street, but they gradually line up to the side of the street. These 4 buildings, for example, were built during the turn of the 20th century, and their appearance provides a glimpse at what was fashionable during that time. As the Chinese moved to Chulia Street, their clan and district associations also moved there. This is Eng Phúc Tong, the temple of the United Cantonese District Association. It was built here on land that was owned by Kapitan Chung Keng Kui, who gave it in exchange for the land on Church Street, on which he built his office, residence and family temple. Now if you compare the architecture style of the Eng Phúc Tong with that of Chung Keng Kui's family temple, you will find some resemblance. In all likelihood, he might have engaged the same craftsman from Fusan to work on this temple. One day I will do a separate video to show you Chung Keng Kui's family temple and his residence, which today houses the Penang Peranakan Museum. The door is not open today, but never mind. If you go to my website Penang Travel Tips and look up Eng Phúc Tong, you will see photos I've taken in there. On that plaque in Chinese calligraphy is the name Eng Phúc Tong, which means the Hall of 5 Prosperities. The grim granite facade is similar to other Cantonese-style temple architecture in Georgetown, especially the ones along King Street. The building is well preserved and restored, and is famous for its ornamentation, particularly the intricate figurines using qianyan or pottery shards. Equally intricate are those elaborately carved and gilded fascia boards. The Eng Phúc Tong was completed in 1898 when prosperity from tin mining has overrun Georgetown with an influx of migrants from southern China. The majority of those migrants came as illiterate indentured laborers. Only sons of the elites have an opportunity to learn to read and write, and those select few did receive their education here, for the Eng Phúc Tong also served as a school. But even as the Chinese people moved to occupy Chulia Street, they did not completely displace the Indians. The higher ranking and wealthy Indians stayed put and kept their place on the street. Across the road, behind that Chinese-style arch, is one of the few remaining Anglo-Indian bungalows built in the early 19th century, when the surroundings were an Indian settlement, and has remained to this day, albeit having been bought over by the Chinese and converted today into a boutique hotel. This double-story bungalow is one of the oldest buildings along Chulia Street. It offers a glimpse at the architecture style from back then, before the Chinese came and altered the entire appearance of the street. Being one of the few brick bungalows to be erected here when the rest was still wooden kampung houses, it has managed to remain standing until now, close to 200 years after it was built. As its ownership changed from Indian to Chinese, the bungalow today sports an eclectic fusion of the original Anglo-Indian architecture with Chinese-style ornamentation. It is clear that this bungalow has undergone massive makeovers even as the area transitioned from an Indian settlement to a Chinese neighborhood. A major addition to the property is the traditional Chinese gateway, which was added around the turn of the 20th century. However, the bungalow was spared from demolition and is today one of the few properties in the Anglo-Indian style along Chulia Street today. But not all buildings enjoy such luck. Many have been replaced by newer and taller structures that are more in keeping with present needs. Let's have one last look at this Anglo-Indian bungalow before we move on. Many of the historic buildings along Chulia Street are tucked away and low-key, so you would not notice them unless you look for them. Across the road from here is a small mosque. It is as old as the Anglo-Indian bungalow, if not older. This is Masjid Jami Alim Shah, which was founded in 1811, but the present structure dates to 1952. It was the mosque of the Tanjore Indians, another Indian Muslim community in Penang, who hailed from what is presently Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu. We are finally walking along the 5-foot way, and as you can see, it is serving its intended purpose of keeping pedestrians like me sheltered from the elements. Unfortunately, since different buildings were built at different times, the arches between buildings are not of uniform height, often requiring their user to stoop down or climb up. Once in a while, there will be a break between the shop houses to provide access to properties that are set back from the street. These are usually older bungalows like the one we saw before. What we have here, now also a hotel, is a double-story Indo-Malay bungalow. It too dates to the early 19th century and is quite likely the property of an important or wealthy individual. Like the one before, this property has also undergone makeovers over the past 200 years. If only the building could talk, it would have told us what astonishing changes it has seen of Penang over the course of its long life. As you can see, Chulia Street has such courtyard bungalows that are set back from the street itself. When the shop houses were built, they formed a new row right beside the street. Those courtyard bungalows not only lost their street frontage, they also have to accept the rest of their existence looking at the rear side of the newer shop houses. Their access to Chulia Street is now reduced to passageways like this one. Without such passageways, they will be totally cut off and isolated. But in present time, those bungalows possibly appreciate the shop houses, which now form a natural sound barrier. Having said that, Chulia Street today, as I'm taping this, is unusually quiet. Perhaps it's still too early in the day. Otherwise, it would be a bustling street with lots of vehicular traffic. Beyond this tiger mural, we turn right and there, tucked away, is yet another courtyard bungalow. This is another Anglo-Indian bungalow, similar to the first bungalow we saw, the one with the Chinese arch. But this one is well preserved in its original condition. This building dates to 1910. It was built on the foundation of an earlier bungalow, and it preserves the bungalow's original granite pavings. If I'm not mistaken, it was used to house the Dawoodi Bohra Mosque, a private mosque for the Bohra people, another Indian Muslim community in Penang. The reason they have their own mosque is because they are Shiite Muslims, whereas the Malays are Sunni Muslims. As you can see, walking Chulia Street today, you will notice its Chinese character, but the Chinese influence on the street only came later. If you go beyond the street, you will find still standing properties that belong to the Indians and Indian Muslims. Due to its long history, the street has continued to evolve and to keep up with times. Walking it in the 70s and 80s, you will find many budget hotels catering to shoestring travelers. Over time, the shoestring travelers slowly give way to those who expect a little bit more in creature comfort. And the available accommodation also evolve to well accommodate. If only we could see Chulia Street at different parts of its long life, we would come across different types of people, from the Indians and Indian Muslims to the Chinese, and who knows, in another few decades, perhaps another community may predominate here. We are now nearing the western end of Chulia Street, where it meets Penang Road, Leeds Street and Aga Road. But before we get there is one more place I want to show you, and it's this building, which is the Nam Hai Hui Kun, another Cantonese district association. So while the Hokkiens align themselves by clans, the Cantonese do so by district. In this case, this is the association for the Cantonese who hail from Nanhai County in present-day Guangdong Province in southern China. The property occupies a plot that is long but narrow. When property plots were carved out along Chulia Street, they are long but narrow for each property to afford some street frontage, at the very least wide enough for a carriage to pass through. As it costs the local authority an expense to maintain the street, properties are taxed according to the width of the street frontage. In a way, that is a very fair system. The more street frontage you enjoy, the more you pay. As we exit the Nam Hai Hui Kun, look across the street at the bungalow on the opposite side. It has undergone much renovations. The original was an Anglo-Indian bungalow with a spacious compound that today is entirely consumed by add-on structures. The bungalow itself dates to the early 19th century, predating the shophouses. One last look at Nam Hai Hui Kun before we move on. As we make our way down this stretch of Chulia Street, notice the two shorter shophouses on the left. These two are older than the rest. They were built in the mid-19th century, making them one of the oldest and earliest shophouses along the street. Next to them are shophouses that came later in the 1910s. And you would notice also on our left a chimney-like structure. That's the minaret of the Anjuman Himayatul Madrasah, another Islamic school along Chulia Street. It dates to 1947 and was founded by Pakistani Muslims. The mother organization was established in Lahore, Pakistan in 1884. So as you can see, the Indians living along Chulia Street is not homogeneous. They are incredibly diverse, and yet they all live together, migrated here from India thousands of miles away in the 19th century. They used to be the dominant community along Chulia Street, but their numbers began to decline from the mid-19th century onwards. Nevertheless, some of their properties keep their position along the street to this day. In front of us is one of the few three-story shophouses along Chulia Street. It dates to 1928, when the Indian community has very much given way to the Chinese. This three-story shophouse was built in the strait's eclectic style. As we come to the end of Chulia Street, on our left, curving gracefully to follow the street, is a row of shophouses dating to the 1910s. As we reach this traffic island, our walk of Chulia Street has come to an end. I hope you enjoyed this walk and the information about the street that comes with it. Please give this video a like so that YouTube will show it to more people. And subscribe to this channel for more videos like this so that I can take you to discover more streets and places. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to having you again in my next video.